Mini episode 1231 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello everyone, welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1231. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris. We have with us here today FDH Lounge dignitary Ben Chu. We are going to be breaking down The Last Dance, going through it. This is part 13 of our Coronavirus Crisis 2020 series. We are looking at what is almost the official piece of entertainment during the lockdown here, or at least probably the most popular as far as pop culture goes. ESPN, of course, deciding to move up the Michael Jordan documentary several months and take advantage of the fact that we're all at home. There are no sports on, and in later May 2020, as we are recording this, this is starting to change a bit, but sports are still nowhere near on the immediate horizon. A little bit of stuff, a little NASCAR here, a little Bundesliga there, but not sports as we knew them before. So The Last Dance steps into the void, and Ben will get a chance to talk about what we thought of it. What were your thoughts overall on it, my friend?
I thought it was arguably one of the most anticipated documentaries when it was released back in 2018, 2019. And I think overall, just for fans of the sport, it was up to expectations. You saw, the entire career arc of Michael Jordan in the NBA and then his brief retirement foray in the baseball. And it touched on a lot of other key topics about those whole teams that some fans would know and some fans would not know. But I think in the totality, very similar to OJ Made in America. It did a really good precursor of letting us understand what was essentially the mind of Michael Jordan during those Bulls runs, the championships.
And in the sense that it was an accurate documentary, I think, 100% from the perception of Michael Jordan. If you want to read about the psyche of Michael Jordan, these type of things. The actual events themselves, I don't know. We'll talk about this a little bit more. I would give it probably about a C to C plus for accuracy, B plus for entertainment in my book. But as far as, it was 100% accurate in showing you Michael Jordan warts and all. But when you look at the fact that, again, this thing was greenlit by him eventually. The director had talked to him in 2016 on the day of the Cavs championship parade. This had been in the works more or less since it was shot back in 97, 98, when the footage had been there. How ironic is it, Ben Chu? We are here in a lockdown that was caused by a virus that came out of Wuhan, China, and essentially this documentary is the Chinese democracy of long-awaited documentaries.
I have no comment, Rick. No comment.
I wonder if.
Is that why you brought the Asian person up?
I wonder if Axl Rose might see any point of comparison there. I wonder, but
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the only other thing I could think of that had been under wraps for such a long period of time. Michael Jordan eventually decided to go ahead with this, and the very cynical thought being that as LeBron James was edging closer and closer to his career accomplishments, that it would be a way to, the only card Michael Jordan had left as far as reasserting himself in the GOAT debate, because his career's behind him, there's nothing else that could really be done to thrust himself into the forefront, the consciousness of today. And in that way, and I'm certainly not going to be so cynical as to say that Michael Jordan is glad that we had a global pandemic so that it could occupy center stage as it did. But if that was his point of view 4 years ago in deciding to go ahead with this, to reassert himself in that way. Suffice it to say, under the circumstances, Ben, it couldn't have worked out any better than he could have ever imagined.
Right, and just if we want to talk just like the brass tacks of this, Michael Jordan memorabilia has been skyrocketing through the totality of it. One of the infamous Michael Jordan 1986 Clear rookie card has quintupled in price and might essentially is going to average at some point going for $100,000 if it's graded a Jordan rookie. And in terms of the legacy of Jordan, we all kind of, as more older generational sports fans, we understand like the Michael Jordan cornucopia of how he was because we grew up and spent time watching those. We lived the 90s in that totality. Obviously, I'm a little bit younger than you in that timeline.
Sure.
But we both have like a cognizant recognition of Michael Jordan playing. For a lot of people out there, they really don't. I mean, anyone under the age of 18 never saw Michael Jordan play live. And just the whole cornucopia of how the 90s and nostalgia seemingly comes around every once in a while, and those teams are just so iconic, and everyone, just with the whole analysis of the film itself, is a look inside of how Michael Jordan was as a player, but it's also in terms of the psyche of who Michael Jordan was as a player as well. Because we all discuss, and it's the same thing during stories coming out after Kobe Bryant says this, how maniacal they were in trying to get the best out of their teammates, trying their hardest to win, and how that needed them as a different individual. And that's just kind of the big, huge benefit that this documentary provides. That it provides people who weren't necessarily basketball fans or who knew or saw Michael Jordan play live. It gave you sort of that air of who he was as a person, along with the teams that those Bulls had together.
Absolutely, and when you talk about that, when you're talking about, and it's hard for me to even imagine, but yeah, I mean, kids who never saw Michael Jordan, who never experienced it, I mean, it's not just him. I can imagine any number of folks, that they would be looking at through the course of this documentary. I could imagine a kid saying to his dad, that guy on TV, Jalen Rose, you mean he actually used to play basketball? There was probably conversations like that all over America.
Right. And I think the thing, too, is that with any sort of documentary looking back at the past, it's more of a historical referendum in terms of what is perceived to have happened than what really truly happens. Because we discuss this in documentaries all the time. It's a viewpoint from either an individual, the director, or from any other person. That's why I think when we discuss documentaries, think documentaries have to be fact-based. And most of the time there's going to be facts guaranteed. But you are taking a position of a certain thing or a person. So there's always going to be a gray area no matter what you look at.
Sure. And that's a thing where, again, I said before, if you're looking at this as far as a documentary of the psyche of Michael Jordan, it's 100% accurate. If you're looking at it as a documentary of the events as they unfolded, much less so. And to where I've heard people say it's not a documentary, it's entertainment. I think what they mean to say is it's not journalism or pure journalism, it's entertainment. And that's where I would agree with them, because in looking at this again, it's been a little bit hazy, Ben Chu, on what has come out as far as how the decisions were made on this thing. But watching this, again, I don't know if this is me wearing a tinfoil hat or not, but I don't feel like it is in this instance. To me, it was crystal clear Michael Jordan had final cut, and that compromised the accuracy of it.
I think on some level if you're ever focusing on one professional athlete who's had a cultivated edge experience similar to Michael Jordan's entire career, that's always going to be a minor issue within the narrative. And it depends in terms of how a director is allowed to do certain things and how to build a story from it. Because as a basketball historian, we all know there were significant omissions of stuff that should have been discussed a little bit further onward. But in terms of the totality of a single 10-part series, it covered, I would say, 90% accurately most of the things that happened. But then there's always going to be 10% of stuff they didn't cover, or things that were fudged to make it
Well, I mean, this is a sort of half joke, a bitter half joke that I made on Twitter when it was going on. I think it was parts 5 and 6 of the documentary. I think it was the night of that when Jerry Seinfeld appeared when they were doing the 98 part, and then when they did the flashback to 92. And I was like, you know, how fitting is it Jerry Seinfeld appears on the episode where they yada 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 the 92 Cavs, because that's a part of it. And again, I'm a lifelong Cavs fan. I'm going to be a little sensitive about these things. But to me, you're setting up a narrative here. The 91 East Finals, okay, that was the culmination of many years versus Detroit. I get that, whatever. 93, yes, they were taken to the wall by the Knicks. I get that. But 92 against the Cavs, it's the battle to defend your title, which was monumental. It was the first title defense that the Bulls ever went through. They skipped ahead to the NBA Finals in 92, and that was a thing where in watching that, it was a very, very competitive 6-game series. I remember one game where the Cavs just flat blew them out. It was very exciting as a Cavs fan. I will say also, too, that what I noticed at the time, and I've talked about this on the show almost ad nauseum, because I compared it when we were talking about the Cavs run in the mid to late 2010s with LeBron, about how Tristan Thompson was so demoralized the other team with offensive rebounds, a couple of those playoff series, I think especially against Atlanta. That's what Horace Grant did to my Cavs in 92. Horace Grant, look, there was a big three the first time around, not just the second time around when Rodman was there for the second three-peat. The first three-peat, Horace Grant was very important, but you get back to Final Cut, Jordan has an axe to grind against him because he blames him for the Jordan rules. Horace Grant showed up on there primarily in terms of being blamed for that, and then when Orlando beat the Bulls in 95 to go to the finals, about how much it meant to Horace Grant to stick it to the Bulls. But again, his great accomplishment in that series, getting all those offensive rebounds and really, really demoralizing the Cavs and helping to kind of grind them down, again, to me that's emblematic of how he didn't get the credit that he deserved, and I felt that was the biggest omission of the series, was in glossing over and treating it like it was just a big two the first time around, the first three-peat. Obviously, to me, Jordan and Pippen were clearly several rungs above Horace, but to act like he wasn't a big star in his own right, I thought was just, it was crappy, I thought.
Yeah, I don't want to say it was the biggest omission, because I still clearly see the biggest omission was them not mentioning the mailman doesn't deliver on Sunday trash talk from Scottie Pippen in the, I believe, the 97 finals.
Yeah.
That they lost. That one of the bigger stories that everyone talked about, they completely didn't even bring it up. And I think Grant got a really kind of a hard look at him as a player. He's always been underrated in my opinion. But
yeah.
I think the problem is that with those early 90s Bulls teams, they kind of, and I'll admit this to, and I think this is one of the frailties of the documentary, is that pretty much outside of the discussion with the Pistons and the discussion with Magic, a lot of those teams, and then you would argue maybe 93 in Phoenix, they brought that up a little bit more, but they kind of, I'll notice too, like in 92, they kind of glossed over the Blazers. In 96, they brought up the Sonics, but it was kind of like, you would expect that they would have talked a little bit more about them, considering.
Right.
I was more shocked that the 95, 96 Bulls team, even though they went 72-10, was kind of glossed over entirely. That season just felt like, well, they went 72-10. They had a decent battle with this team that they were like, we didn't even bother to go into that. We had more information about the 7-game series in the Eastern Conference Finals between the Pacers and the Bulls, which in my opinion was a great series, but most people are not going to remember it in the timeline of time.
Yeah, I would agree. Some of the choices that they made were interesting to say the least as far as what they covered. I've seen some criticism as well that you didn't really hear anything about the Houston Rockets winning the title the 2 years in between the three-peats. And again, maybe that's just them sort of putting that great asterisk on it that it was without the Jordan/Pippen Bulls in those years, but that was kind of noteworthy. The other thing was, and this is where, and again, I didn't feel like I learned an awful lot let me, before I get further into my point, let me ask you. I mean, I felt like I learned a few things here and there. Obviously, some of the details about Dennis Rodman and Carmen Electra, we could have inferred that over the years, but there was a little bit of TMI, which I suppose was to be expected in this documentary. But by and large, I didn't feel like I learned a whole lot new. Did you feel like you did, Ben?
I mean, in terms of just like the uncut scenes that we were able to see from that scene, from their final championship run, we did see it. We definitely, I think, it did a good job encompassing the Bulls in the early 1980s before Jordan got there and discussed just of how the team was back then. Because I think a lot of young kids and just people growing up, like, there was always this perception that the Chicago Bulls were a fantastic organization from the beginning. And most people don't know that they were pretty much a laughing stock of the 60s, 70s, and going into the early 80s.
That's
and
right.
It kind of feels like at times that we're just, is that the birth of the Bulls is cognizant with the birth of Michael Jordan at the same time. And you can't really move against either of those scenarios. But just in terms of learning things, you're going to get insight from players and analysis of things like that. But in terms of if your literal goal to watch this entire documentary series was to learn more about how the NBA game is played, you got to check snippets of it from Phil Jackson and just the analysis of stuff. But this was not, the argument I would put together. This was not an analytical basketball movie. This was a retelling of the Michael Jordan legacy and those Bulls teams of the 90s.
Exactly, and when I was asking you the question, like you and I are basically historian types, so we're well versed in a lot of this kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily a put down of them to say that we didn't learn anything really super new, or we might have learned some things here and there, but maybe not as much as we might have thought, because you and I came into this with a tremendous background on what actually did happen. But the one thing that it sort of reinforced in my mind that I think I knew, but I maybe didn't grasp as much until this, I get the whole thing in the end. I get Jerry Krause being the villain of the piece, because it's insane to rip that team apart at that point in time. A team that probably had another title left in them, maybe two, maybe more, although I doubt it, but probably at least two. And again, Reinsdorf and his cheapness bears in on this as well. His economic want to break up that team because of the salaries and everything. But I get that part of it. But as far as Krause being, up until that point, arguably one of the great executives in NBA history, the entire team being put around Jordan, and you look at that and you say, well, Jordan lifted these guys, whatever. Yeah, but it had to be the right pieces around him. And I think, if anything, we've seen over the course of LeBron's career subsequently and the careers of other great players what happens when they do have good fits around them and when they don't. And everything that was put around Michael Jordan ended up working and coalescing with him. Some of that is the genius of Michael Jordan. Some of that is the coaching of Phil Jackson. But some of that, yes, is everything with Jerry Krause, from being the first guy on God's green earth to be talking about wanting to get Scottie Pippen in there and noticing him and wanting him to be a part of it. The aforementioned Horace Grant, all the other moves in the early going, the pieces that were around Jordan, it's no accident that the pieces around him fit as well as they did, and it is not 100% Michael Jordan. And while the whole thing, I get that. I get that they emphasized Jerry Krause's outsized role in the premature breakup of the team. But part of the weakness I felt also, too, of Jordan having final cut is that Michael Jordan is going to go to his grave not giving Jerry Krause the credit he deserves for helping build the thing in the first place.
Right, and I mean, that's going to be hard for any athlete, because when and again, if we look at how kind of everything ended for Krause during his tenure with the Bulls in the 5 years after, it reinforces what the belief is, which was Jerry Krause was a great GM, but then his ego got in the way. And again, it's going to be what it is going to be at that period of time.
Right.
But to look through at least some of the names that he was able to draft and able to acquire over their time, he did a very good job of finding the right pieces and getting the right, that psyche where if I'm the GM of arguably one of the most successful teams in history and I got no credit for it, I can understand why I'm very hesitant or wanting to keep a team like that together. And I will note, though, too, as you probably know in the final episode, they did discuss, again, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but they do discuss Ryan Stork's monetary concerns and all these other things. And I thought that was maybe glossed over a little bit, but I was surprised they included it, even if it was towards the end.
Exactly, and spoiler alert, they do end up breaking up the Bulls in '98. That is the last run, so I apologize for that spoiler for any of y'all that don't know how this thing ends. But I mean, it's interesting because if you dig a little bit deeper on my last point here about Krause, it is, I mean, off the top of my head, off the top of your head, probably, at least in modern sports history, a very, very unique legacy to have in terms of, again, and everyone will always put the asterisk on him, well, he didn't draft Jordan, but look, I guarantee you, if he was the GM in '84 and they had the third pick and Jordan was there, they'd have taken him. I mean, and just about any GM with the third pick would have taken Jordan there. But as far as to do such an incredible job and then to live long enough to become the villain, so to speak, or in this case, by live, I mean hold the job. I mean, you think of somebody like Tom Landry the last couple of years in Dallas, but that was more like a slow kind of fade out of the Cowboys, and people were still shocked when he was fired just because of everything he'd accomplished prior to that. I mean, that's probably the closest you can get, is somebody who's a legend who kind of, maybe they hang on a little bit too long or their last couple of years are unsuccessful. But in the case of Krause, active legacy self-destruction as this was, a guy who would have been, you know, a no-brainer NBA Hall of Fame GM, to that, you know, from that point on, to get at the very least a much more complicated legacy by being along with the co-owner, along with the owner, one of the co-architects of bringing the whole thing crashing down prematurely. It's a legacy that I can't think of anybody else having the same type of legacy in sports, not off the top of my head.
I mean, the thing that makes it bad for his scenario, too, is that essentially the way it broke up made logical sense, but then people tend to forget that Bulls team in the lockout year was arguably one of the worst teams in NBA history.
Yep.
They still hold the record for the lowest point total scored in a single season in terms of just total offense. They also still hold the record for the lowest point total scored during the common era of the NBA, only scoring 49 points in a total game. So I'm not going to argue against Jerry Krause in that respect that he was doing the wrong thing, because we have now seen it during the Sam Hinkie regime in Philadelphia. He ended up doing very similar things to what Krause did with the Chicago. The problem with that, Krause kind of took a lot of guys that either were the same player or didn't fit right, or he just took complete busts in the league. So I don't think he did himself. He's one of those sort of interesting mythical figures we have in the NBA, where he was such a good scout and manager that he had the opportunity to win a legacy like Mount Rushmore GM. And I think a bit of ego and a bit of narcissism kind of plays into what his downfall ended up being. Because if he had, like you noted, if he would have hypothetically retired, he probably would have fast-tracked his position to becoming a Hall of Famer at some point.
I think so, and whatever insecurity he had at the time about not getting enough credit for the rise of the Bulls, it would have come. He just needed to trust that. It would have come. If you're the general manager of the 6-time world champions, and yeah, you didn't get Jordan, which a lot, people, again, probably unfairly dumped on him for that, but you put everybody else around Jordan, including Phil Jackson, which that's the grand irony at the end of this thing here, is that Phil Jackson ended up, on such bad terms with him, and that whole infamous thing of, he won't be back next year no matter what. I mean, it's shocking to consider that a coach that was coming off of a 2-peat heading for a 3-peat, being told ahead of time he wouldn't be back the next year no matter what, simply because Jerry Krause wanted to get his buddy Tim Floyd in there so much. You look at all these type things. again, very, very interesting choice. I think we were all looking to see, again, spoiler alert here, but if there was going to be any kind of an epilogue, there wasn't. They really seemed determined to end this thing on about as high a note as possible. I've seen some joking on social media about, boy, I can't wait for episodes 11 and 12 this week of Michael Jordan in a Wizards uniform. There was none of that, Ben Chu.
No, and I think we all, in terms of, we all know that for an event or for something like this documentary, that it's always going to be the framework via an athlete. And we're going to see, as we saw with ESPN, they're already discussing their own 10-part documentary on Tom Brady coming up in 2021. We're going to see a lot more of these documentaries because I think people really like looking back into historical times in sports and then re-experiencing them in the moment. In comparison to what a lot of documentaries tend to do now for sports, they try to cram everything into one nicely neat 2-hour packaging. And eventually, I think one of the big, champions of this 10 sort of extended format, which I would even equate to like a mini series at this point, is that it does a very good job of showing us the legacy of an individual instead of showing us the legacy of a team in a very short timeline.
Well, in terms of that, Ben, again, with what they're going to do with Brady and Belichick, you're going to be looking at a situation where, obviously, the epilogue will be playing out this fall as far as their first year apart. But essentially, it's going to be zero distance. Part of the magic of this whole thing, and where, like I said, for all the nitpicking I'm doing about accuracy here and there and different aspects of it, where I said I still give it at least a B+ for entertainment, is it was really excellent. I did look forward to watching it on Sunday nights. It was something where, again, in this weird sportsless world that we've been in, it was something for everybody collectively to kind of look forward to. But part of it is the magic of distance, of nostalgia, of during, and again, what will never be divorced from it. It's a time and a place. The fact that it happened during this pandemic, we're all on lockdown, we don't have sports, we're watching this thing here. It'll always be wedded to the time and place that we saw it. But part of it also is 22 years since the last dance. There's been enough time. Like you said, there have been kids that have been born and have grown up that never experienced Michael Jordan in the 90s Bulls. There's those of us where it is wedded to, very, very young adulthood in my case, younger than that for you, but a time and a place that we both remember. I mean, the Brady thing, Brady-Belichick, it won't be the same because there won't be as much distance in there.
Overall, just in terms of the time, though, is that I think those Jordan-era Bulls are just iconic among just these sports going public. It was Michael Jordan's career sort of intersected at like the perfect time in the mid-'80s going into the early '90s with the boom of the NBA market was under the David Stern regime of just making it a global game and showing the amazing abilities of these athletes. And it seems like when we talk about Tom Brady and we talk about the Patriots, we know they're a dynasty. We know Tom Brady's going to be one of the or the best quarterbacks of all time. But the one difference with Michael Jordan is that he's an iconic brand that is not going to go away anytime soon. Before this, there were discussions of kids who don't even watch basketball who know of him via the Jordan brand and the Jordan insignia and all the shoes and just his entire Mount Rushmore of accomplishments. And the thing is, when you have a documentary that recaps all these things, the big thing I would like to always believe is that it's a growing of a legacy that was dormant for a little bit, but now it's back on center stage, and just with the entire zaniness of how it got pushed up in terms of the coronavirus, it's insane to think that this documentary could have done any negative publicity to Michael Jordan. Outside of his issues with Scott Burrell, I only think it improves his brand in the long run.
The other thing, too, being, and I'm going to ask you this, and this is where I'm glad I have you on the show doing this discussion with, not just for the basketball aspect, but because, and previously with that NBA lottery pick where you covered the intersection of basketball and pop culture, which ultimately this entire documentary is at that intersection. And I wonder how much of this, in terms of the nostalgia and the looking back, is that we all seem to trace the beginning, regardless of what our age is. I mean, my youth, was the 80s. You were getting born in the 80s much, much later on. But regardless of your age, we seem to trace that as like the beginnings almost of modern life as we know it, whether it be the birth of cable TV, home video game systems, VCRs, etc., of where so much of pop culture sort of harkens back to that. You have Jordan that came out of the 80s, into the 90s, and then almost all the way up to the millennium at that point there. That these are like formative years, and obviously for all the millennials out there, this is a big thing where as far as them growing up and things that they got to experience, even if it was only like the tail end of it too. So as far as being like a time and a place in pop culture, bursting into the NBA in that year of '84 and taking it forward, I think that's part of the magic of the story as well.
And I mean, just generally in terms of the narrative, Rick, that we always see, and we discussed this off air, we always see these cycles of people looking back to the past. And we're now in the 2010s. I mean, let me get this correct, we are in the 2020s, but we're now starting to look back in the 2010s and then the 2000s and the 90s, even though they don't feel that far away. It's been a 30-year run at this point.
Right.
For the 90s. It's been the 90s. And I think we're seeing the cyclical nature of how we talk about nostalgia and how we like to remember certain things from our childhood and through different periods of time. And for most people, the 90s NBA was pretty much the NBA on NBC, Ralph All Rock. And these Bulls teams, and everyone remembers where they were when they were watching these games. Most people probably who were alive during that timeline saw that final shot against Utah at some level. And it's just a cornucopia of how the world was in the 90s and how different everything is, even in our timeline right now. It's one discussion that a lot of people have talked about when discussing Jordan playing in this era. How would he have dealt with social media? How would the Bulls have crafted the same form of an image for him during this timeline? Would we discuss him in the way that we do if he was sort of had LeBron's championship record? It's really just, Michael was one, there's always this discussion when I've heard on other people discussing being in the right place at the right time. And for Michael Jordan, he arguably was in the right place at the right time.
He was.
Better than anyone else.
Well, and I'll tell you this, I don't know how many people have as colorful a story as I do about where they were that night of the final shot. I didn't get to see very much of the game because I caught the end of the game somewhere outside at a sports bar in the inner harbor of Baltimore. I had flown out there with some friends for the weekend to see the Great American Bash. So earlier in the evening, it was, I think, Hulk Hogan and Bret the Hitman Hart in the main event at the Baltimore Arena against Roddy Piper and Macho Man Randy Savage. So there's some names to harken back to. So after being there for the Great American Bash card, we wandered out, and like I said, we watched it somewhere in downtown Baltimore, and I just remember going, crap, because as a Cavs fan, I was always rooting against Michael Jordan no matter what. And again, that's the greatness of the player, that he could inspire that if he played on the other team, you might be somebody like me that might begrudge him winning as much as he did. But it was, Michael Jordan, warts and all, basically in this documentary, which, if there was going to be anything predictable, I think it would be that. I don't think any of us expected to come out of this thing with any kind of new sort of look at Michael Jordan, because everybody has known over the course of the years what kind of a person he can be, and stubborn and competitive and whatever, and he was owning his brand all the way through this thing. I got to give him that.
Right, and I mean, in terms of the totality of how his brand was built, was also covered in the documentary itself, and how just some of the ways that they talked about the man Jordan and all these sort of things that were contributed to his success, and just how his team of David Falk and Tim Grover and just all those people were able to help him get to the peak of what he could achieve, because he has arguably done more with his abilities than any other athlete in the history of the NBA outside of maybe Bill Russell.
Right.
And it's a testament to how he is in the first place, also a testament of who he surrounded himself with.
Well, and you raise an interesting point there, because I don't know that we needed quite as much of the jock sniffers around him getting the airtime that they did, particularly at the expense of more substantive figures, but that's just a personal choice on my part.
Mm-hmm. And it's understandable, too, because we want to see how people react to things in the currency of how life is. And, I mean, it would be disingenuous to not know that Michael Jordan had an inner circle with different people and talked to different people, just how things were.
Right.
With how he is as a person. It's just, and I think we also, because we all remember this, especially with Jordan in this current timeline, he himself as an individual has seen some criticism in the way he's handled the Bobcats, now the Hornets, his timeline of being crying Jordan the meme, and just how everything has kind of been for him in recent timelines to go from being uberly successful to still being a success to now facing the issues of being an owner in professional sports. But it's a testament that he's out there doing it. And a lot of people would probably argue at the time when he was drafted, most people didn't think this was his ceiling. And it's argued that you could even make this argument he surpassed his own ceiling by leaps and bounds.
Absolutely. When you consider that I think a lot of people projected him based off of the career at North Carolina, that he would come in and be a multiple-time All-Star and certainly would be capable of being the best player on a championship team or a team that might win more than one title. But yeah, anytime you come in and you have arguably the greatest career of all time, that is something that, particularly in that day and age, was not, well, I don't want to say it wasn't expected, but it was rare for it to be expected. LeBron came into the league with those type of expectations in 03. I guess if you go back to Alcindor/Jabbar in the late 60s, once in a blue moon somebody comes into the league where there are those kind of expectations. But just the fact that I could name those two examples off the top of my head, it's very rare. Even Magic and Bird, I think people thought they would come in and really have excellent type careers. But outside of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Michael Jordan, at least in the modern era, not Michael Jordan, LeBron James, I struggle to think of anybody else that came in with the expectations that they would be a contender to be the greatest of all time.
Right. And I mean, it's also a testament during this timeline, too, is that when Jordan was the third pick, Houston took Hakeem during that timeline, or Hakeem Olajuwon during that period, and even though his career turned out to be an absolute Hall of Fame, no doubt, or career still has his stamp on the game today, that the criticism of them is still very minimal at that point. And that's just a testament to, I think, we all thought that Jordan, like, we always make this point in sports, and the same thing in life, there are people that do a lot with less, and there are people that do nothing with more. And you have to give Michael credit for the ability that he did a lot. He did a lot with his ability, but he got to the point of where I think few athletes, or just even general human beings, even get to that level.
Absolutely. And I think in the case of Houston, what you said stems to three different things. Like you said, first of all, Hakeem Olajuwon had not just a Hall of Fame career, but a really superlative Hall of Fame career. They won 2 titles, and being in a situation there where they had a chance subsequently to put together the Twin Towers the way that they did, there was a thought that, and again, while that didn't work out with Sampson, although they did at least get to the '86 finals, but yeah, like you said, Houston gets let off the hook in a way that Portland never does, because Bowie was just Bowie, Greg Oden, Bill Walton, albeit they won a championship, a long line of talented but injury-prone centers, and Bowie's career was, I hesitate to say the most disappointing of them, because Oden's is cripplingly disappointing as well. Very similar in that way as far as not elevating their teams, and again, just it's a real bitch to be in the shadow of Michael Jordan, as so many great players were over a period of time.
Right, and I think that's what makes the legacy of Jordan so amazing. Like we discussed in terms of how great and legendary Bill Russell was as a winner, but one of the big facts that have come out from this thing is just that
Yeah.
And unless I'm mistaken, I don't think another player is going to reach that number anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody else.
Even if you make the argument for Russell, Russell doesn't even come close to 16 Hall of Famers that he denied at that point. Now, I'll buy it. That's because there were less teams. But the argument that a lot of younger basketball fans tend to make with LeBron that, well, he went up against tough competition. But, I mean, I'll admit, during this recent timeline, the teams that LeBron ended up losing to had great players, but not in the caliber of how Michael Jordan had to constantly deal with day in and day out.
I do think that Gail Goodrich and Jerry West might say, well, you know, we're just two of those guys, but look at how many times it happened to us. So for Walton, or I'm sorry, for Russell, he was rejecting Hall of Famers. It was less of them numerically, but it was the same guys time and time again, it seemed like.
Right. And I mean, and that point too, though, is that I think that does give more credence to Jordan's legacy, though, because he had to go up against more talented guys. Not more, I wouldn't say more talented guys, I think that's a misnomer statement, but more in terms of, like, he had to go up against a variety of different opponents and different people trying to claw at the mantelpiece instead of the early 60s and early 70s where the totality of the great talent in the league tended to be top heavy.
I do agree with that, but it was a fascinating documentary, and again, just the fact that it was, you know, warts and all as far as how we're critiquing it, even that seems kind of fitting, because when you're looking at the persona of Michael Jordan, that's what you're getting. And maybe a guy that had to be driven like he was to be a champion, but you know, some of the you know, side effects of that, or whatever you want to call it, quite frankly, it would be him being an a-hole to a lot of people at a lot of times and everything like that. So I mean, there's when you're talking about being a winner, that's about as consummate as it gets. When you're talking about being a human being, that's where the picture is, shall we say, considerably more mixed. So for a documentary like this, it's almost kind of fitting that we don't sit here and describe it as the perfect kind of a thing, because really there are no perfect people, and that's exemplified no better than Michael Jordan when you're mixing in the personal stuff with his on-court excellence.
And if I've learned anything about life, Rick, is that we all tend to believe that nice people tend to always move up to the top, and there are many cases where that truly does happen. But when we look at these purely exceptional people, you're gonna have to put out on the statement that the truly maniacal and the truly dedicated and the truly gifted people are the ones who are constantly honing their craft and trying to get to those next level. And most human beings do not get that narrative. I mean, the biggest, and I'll end with this narrative, the biggest thing that I remember from the documentary itself was just Jordan's, I believe it was, the Bulls trainer who discussed Jordan's ability to be present in the moment instead of looking in the past or into the future. And I think at the end of the day, that's a very omnipresent of how certain people tend to think who are successful.
When you're talking about that, and when you're talking about the types of people that can be successful and some of the things about them, I almost get the sense that you're saying that Michael Jordan should have shown up at the '84 draft wearing a red baseball cap that said "Make Chicago Great Again."
If I've learned anything about Michael Jordan, that I think if he wanted to run for office right now, probably.
He very well might. He very well might. And he certainly understands, as the documentary underlined yet again, that folks of all political persuasions do buy shoes. So that was touched upon as well. And Michael Jordan, capitalist par excellence, among other things. But it was an excellent documentary vis-a-vis entertainment. As far as we said, journalism, that's where it's a little bit more spotty and inconsistent, but an excellent piece of something to be able to get us through this pandemic. I was looking forward to breaking it down with you, Ben Chu. It did not disappoint. Thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Well, I appreciate it, Rick. And if we learned anything from that documentary at the end of the day, it's that Scott Burrell is a hoe.
Exactly. We did learn that. Yeah. On that note, thank you, everybody, for joining us for FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1231.